Σήμερα είμαστε στην εκπομπή Ξαφνικά και Απρόοπτα με τον Κυριάκο Μερακλή. Είμαι ο Δημήτρης Αχιλαδέλης από τον MGR My Greek Radio και έχουμε καλεσμένο έναν από τους σεναριογράφους της ταινίας Σμύρνη αγαπημένη, τον κύριο Μάρτιν Σέρμαν. Παρελθόν και παρόν γίνονται ένα. Η ταινία βασίστηκε σε αληθινά γεγονότα του 1922 σε αυτή την πόλη τη Σμύρνη. Έλληνες, Τούρκοι, Εβραίοι, Αρμένοι και Λεβαντίνοι ζούσαν κάποτε όλοι μαζί ειρηνικά. Τα πάντα όμως άλλαξαν δραματικά μετά από τα καταστροφικά γεγονότα του 1922. Η ταινία «Σμύρνη μου αγαπημένη» που τιμά την ιστορία ήρθε στο Ηνωμένο Βασίλειο και προβάλλεται από χτες. Smyrna, the story that shall not be forgotten. The critically acclaimed award-winning Greek film Smyrna is set during the 1922 Turkish occupation of the city. The film is directed by Grigoris Garadinakis with an international cast including Mimi Denisi, Leonidas Kakouris, Burak Haki, Katerina Geronikolou, Jane Lapoter, Susan Hampshire, Rupert Graves, Christos Therioglu, and Daphne Alexander. Written by Mimi Denisi in collaboration with two-time Tony Award nominee Martin Sherman. Smyrna has won 6 Hellenic Academy-Awards, including Best Cinematography. Martin Sherman, the acclaimed playwright, to discuss all about the movie. Good afternoon, Mr. Sherman.
Good afternoon.
It's brilliant to have you with us. Thank you for making time in your diary to be with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So tell us a bit about the story and the movie in general. We'll get into specifics in a little while. But tell us about the story itself.
Well, I've just lost somebody. The story is about the catastrophe that happened in Smyrna in 1922, but it's told through the eyes of a Greek family, and over a period of years leading to the final event. And so it's trying to give a very human take on an extremely complicated political and social event, and a devastating event, and an event that had enormous repercussions for Greece and Greek life for many decades afterwards.
So what first drew you to this particular event? Was it the chaos, the everything that was happening at the time? What first inspired you about this story?
Well, I learned about it through Mimi Denisi's play.
Okay.
Mimi wrote a play, Smyrna, which I liked. The joke is the most successful new Greek play since Sophocles. But it's only half of a joke, because it played for 3 years in a theater that seated 1,200 people and were in Athens and was sold out every night. That is, by any standard, fairly awesome and very impressive. And Mimi is one of my closest friends. And so I was very familiar with her play. And she really introduced me to the story of what happened in Smyrna.
So is this something that's been in the pipeline for a while? Has this been a sort of a long-term project?
Yes, we had talked about making it into a film for quite a while. And Mimi asked me to write it with her because she wanted an outside non-Greek view. Because the politics are really complicated. And if you're not Greek, it's easy to get lost within all the many incidents and the many characters. So she wanted somebody who would, from another culture, who would be able to clearly understand what was going on. If I didn't understand it, then we thought there was a problem. And there were times when I didn't understand it, and we had to it had to be clarified or simplified so that it would make sense. And I'm very happy to say that I had friends see a screening of it here in London, British friends who knew nothing whatsoever of the subject matter. And they absolutely followed all the politics very, very clearly. And so I'm enormously pleased about that.
I think that's crucial in something like this, to understand why things are happening rather than just what's
well,
happening.
Absolutely. And Mimi was I think one of the reasons the play was so successful was that Mimi was scrupulous, absolutely scrupulous in detailing the events and the personalities and not leaving anything out and not leaving anybody off of the hook. A lot of politicians, a lot of nationalities do not come out well from this story. And she's been eminently fair. And that's not easy. That's not easy at all.
I was going to say, you know, with something like this, it's almost difficult not to tiptoe around subjects without making people accountable for what's happened, and not just Turks but Greeks and what have you. How difficult was it to transition from a play to a film screenplay? Was it difficult, or was it quite easy to move from one to the other?
No, that's always difficult. Plays, I think plays are probably far more difficult to turn into film than a novel or a short story or an essay, a bit of reporting. Plays are difficult because they are by their very nature claustrophobic. Even though the play, Mimi's play, had a huge vista and had many different scenes and many different locations, nonetheless, there still is something very claustrophobic about a theater, particularly a proscenium theater. And a film requires a certain amount of air, and it is difficult.
So how when you and Mimi were pitching this to potential filmmakers, how was it received? Were they reluctant to embrace such a touchy subject, or did they actually say, you know, this, you know, we want to do this? Or how was it received by potential filmmakers when you?
Well, that's really a question for Mimi, because I wasn't present during the pitching, and I think she very quickly found Tanweer Productions, who are wonderful and who gave her an extraordinary amount of backing and were vividly and strongly on board from the word go. But you must remember, the play had such a reputation in Greece that she was starting from a very strong point.
Did you in a way feel that the reputation of the play was like a weight instead of an advantage? Or
that can be both. It can be an advantage and it can be a weight. There's no question about it. People who have extremely fond memories of the play can walk into a movie theater expecting to be disappointed, or so that's always a problem, which I think we've overcome.
I mean, but sometimes. Sorry, go on.
That is a problem with a beloved play.
Because sometimes people have preconceived ideas of what it should look like, especially if you've known the play for a long time and you've seen it many times, and you've got a preconceived idea in your head of what it should look like on screen. And like you said, some people are disappointed, but some people are just wowed by what
well, actually, you know, that's more of a problem with a novel.
Okay.
Because in a book, you don't actually see the characters.
Okay.
Whereas in a play, you do. So when you walk into a film of a book, you have your imagination already has done so much work that you're in that sense, you're more likely to be disappointed by a book translated into a film than a play.
So looking back at the original screenplay that you and Mimi wrote, how close was the final cut of the film compared to what you had in your mind when you first started? Did it meet your expectations, or did it sort of deviate in a way that you weren't expecting?
No, I think basically it absolutely met our expectations.
Okay.
Of course, the screenplay changes a lot as you work on it, and but the core of it never changed, and because it has a very specific historical story, that couldn't change. If you're not dealing with fact, you can go off on all kinds of tangents, and you can make many changes as you're going along. But we had a particular story that we had to stick to, and so it was very much what we envisioned, and the film is very much what we envisioned, and yeah.
I mean, there's some fabulous actors in there. How involved were you and Mimi in choosing the right people for the right role? How crucial was finding the right people to fit what you had in your mind?
Well, it's always crucial to have the right people. Mimi worked very closely with Panagiotis in casting the film, and the Greek roles certainly, and there are a few of the actors from the play are in it, but it's gorgeously cast, and I had a lot to say about casting the English actors.
Brilliant. So, I mean, you touched upon it being based on obviously historical facts. So, how much of the story was drawn? Obviously, the historical facts are the facts. So
yes.
So that's, you can't move those. But how much was actually drawn, the story wise? How much was it drawn from actual events? And I mean, how much artistic license basically did you use? Did Mimi and you use with regards to the story, or did the story fit the events rather than the events fit the story?
The events dictated the story, and
Okay.
there isn't that much license. Yeah, Mimi invented a family, but the story of the family is absolutely true to what people went through then. Mimi is, among many other things, besides being a brilliant actress, writer, director, producer, she's also an historian. That was her subject at school.
Okay.
She's an incredible researcher, and she probably read every single thing that had ever been written about Smyrna, and discovered quite a few things that were lying in corners that hadn't been looked at for a long time. So the events of the film are all true. They're all true. The difficulty in writing the script was there are so many events that each scene encompasses another historical event occurring, and so there is a great deal of history in it, and you have to find a way of making that history human and relatable and understandable.
So how relevant do you think the story is today with what's going on in the world, not just politically but culturally, with regards to discrimination and marginalized groups? Do you think people today would relate to the horror, the fear, and just the upheaval of what was going on back in that day, that particular time?
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the things that was very striking is that by the time we filmed it, it had become, unfortunately, even more relevant. Because basically we were writing about a group of people who had lived in a culture, who had lived in a city for generations, for centuries, actually, and are decimated and are forced to become refugees. And so it is most sadly a story of today. It is a story of refugees and what makes a refugee and what is lost when you become a refugee. I think that's very important. What is lost, and that feeling, and of course it's the first genocidal event, or the second, of the 20th century, and unfortunately, it hasn't stopped. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it seems like history just repeats itself, and
that's why we have a prologue that takes place now in Mytilene with the refugees, because it is so pertinent, and Mytilene is the island where most of the refugees from Syria and other countries have come to in the last few years. And Mytilene is inhabited by the descendants of Smyrna. So there's an enormous connection. And it's also one of the reasons why when the refugees a few years ago first came to Mytilene, they were greeted with such warmth, because the villagers all had cultural memories of being in exactly the same position, and they all came from Smyrna. So it's extraordinarily relevant.
I mean, sadly, it just seems like history just repeats itself over and over again, and
it never stops repeating itself.
It never stops. But I think it's important to look back at history to realize. Well, I say to not make the same mistakes again, but sadly, as a human race, we do make the same mistakes over and over and over again, and it just seems like never ending, which is quite sad.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the lessons of the film. I mean, I've been to some refugee camps in Greece, and what you see in the eyes of the refugees is the loss, the enormity of what they've lost, and the scar tissue of what the trip away to survive has been like, and what it'll lead them to. Absolutely. And that certainly was true of the survivors of Smyrna, who had an extraordinarily difficult time. They were not greeted with open arms by Greece. They were treated not as Greeks, which they were, but as strangers, and they had to literally begin a life again against enormous odds. And of course, they ultimately triumphed and became a vital part of Greek society.
Absolutely. So, as always is the case with these sort of politically sensitive stories, how would you respond to those that say that there's a definite Greek bias to the story, or is it just a case of perspective?
Well, it's a Greek film.
Absolutely.
How could you not say there's a Greek bias? Except I don't like the word bias. I think it's telling the truth. And Greece, the country, is not let off the hook in this film. Greece's responsibility for some of what happened is very, very clear in this film. So I think it's an extremely fair film. But the central fact of the destruction of Smyrna is unavoidable. So I don't think that's bias. I think that's truth.
It's true, and from perspective, right? From a Greek refugee perspective,
well,
it would be true. Yeah. So it's the film's come out in the UK this week. Is it this week? I think it's come out in the UK.
Yeah.
How was it received in America? What sort of feedback did you get from people that saw the film? What sort of feelings did?
Well, I heard that there was a rapturous reception in America. It had its first showing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art,
right?
Which does not show films.
Okay.
It may be the second film ever projected there. So it was an enormous honor. And evidently a tumultuous event, brilliantly received.
Excellent. Dimitri, have you got any questions?
No, I think it's okay for now. Look, we are MGR My Greek Radio, the official Greek radio in the UK, and it was honor for us to have Mr. Sherman in our radio show.
Well, it's very good to be here, and I love talking about this film because I think it's such an important film.
Yeah.
And I think it's vitally important for everyone to see, because it humanizes a very upsetting event, but one we need to be reminded about. It mustn't be forgotten.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for making time in your diary for us.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you for speaking to us.
Mr. Sherman, thank you, and for me also. Are you located in London at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay. It would be a pleasure if you have the time and you recover for everything you said before, to have you live from our radio station, have a coffee and chat in general. If you have the time, it's a pleasure to come from here.
I would love that. I need a little bit of time to completely get over the ravages.
Whenever you're ready. Whenever you're ready. That's a promise. Okay. Thank you so much.
Please.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was an honor for us, a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.